Instead.
Councillor Mark Gocher representing Castle Ward.
Emily Harrop, Transport and Sustainability Project Lead for Colchester City Council.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer for Colchester City Council.
Rosa Tanfield, Group Manager for Neighbourhood Services for Colchester City Council.
Simon Davison, Sustainability and Climate Change Manager for Colchester City Council.
Councillor Lewis Barber, substituting for, I believe, Councillor Lee Tate.
Councillor Andrew Ellis, Mark Stay and Layer Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy representing Shrub End and substituting for Councillor Tracy Arn.
Councillor Michelle Burrows representing Wivenhoe Ward.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, everyone. So substitutions, Councillor Barber, you're subbing for Councillor Lissamore, not Tate, so different Prittygate councillor, but right geography. And Councillor McCarthy, as he said, is subbing for Councillor Arnold. So item 3, urgent items. I have none before us, unless anyone tells me different. Nope. Declarations of interest, item 4. Any declarations of interest to what we will be discussing? I have Councillor Barber. I think I have a non-pecuniary interest in the matter of school streets due to my position as Deputy Cabinet Member at Essex County Council for Highways. Brilliant. Any other declarations of interest? No, all good. Item 5, minutes of the previous meetings. Panel's asked to approve the minutes from its meeting on the 31st of January 2023. Everyone okay to approve? Excellent. Okay, so that takes us to item 6, have your say. The first person I have is Stuart Johnson. For people coming to have their say, make sure the microphone is turned on. You have 3 minutes to speak. Bell will signal on 2 minutes. And then you may have a minute to come back from the officer's response. But Stuart, you're well versed in this, so go ahead.
Good evening, Chair, councillors and officers. It was great to listen to the sustainable travel update from your January meeting and hear the plans to make it easier and safer to walk, wheel and cycle in Colchester. I'd like to take the opportunity to remind the panel of the vision of Colchester Future Transport Strategy, which is to transform Colchester into a place which prioritises active and safe sustainable travel to bring about health, environmental and economic benefits. This is the strategy that's been adopted both by Colchester City Council and Essex County Council. Colchester Cycling Campaign supports the efforts of Colchester City Council to increase the number of short journeys that are walked, wheeled or cycled. We support the council's actions and look forward to the long-delayed opening of the secure bike park in the city centre. Many of the changes to improve active travel need to be taken by Essex County Council, who are the Highways Authority. However, there are still important steps that Colchester City Council can take, including ensuring that more secure cycle storage is provided in the city and introducing bike hangers on roads so that people who live in dwellings where there isn't room to store bikes have somewhere to keep them. Turning to school streets, which you'll hear about later from officers, we feel that the Essex County Council approach is far too timid for this important issue. If we turn to the example of Winstrey Road School scheme, the impact of this scheme has almost been unnoticeable and has not in any way resulted in the step change to more active travel that's needed to combat climate change, air pollution and improve health. There is still parking on both sides of nearby roads at school times, often blocking access to buses and causing traffic jams going in where vehicles going in the opposite direction meet in what's turned into a single carriageway road. There is also frequent parking on Wheatfield Road at school times, forcing buggies and wheelchair users into the road. If we're going to make children safer, healthier, more independent and more active, we need to take radical action, not the timid steps being taken by Essex County Council. Now, this is what you can do. Please could the panel write to Essex County Council to ask them to be braver and follow the successful approach of other councils like Hackney, where many school streets are closed to traffic at drop-off and pick-up times, which is genuinely transformative and is a measure that massively increases safety for those walking and wheeling and cycling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. I think your first question was on bike hangers and obviously opening the parking for cycling into the town. I don't know if Emily, do you want to take that one up?
The secure cycle park is currently being fitted out, so we expect it to be open very soon. Bike hangers definitely on our radar. It is a project we'd like to pursue in due course, so we'll look at that in the future.
And on the school streets, that's for us to debate later tonight. So I suggest we take on board your points there, Stuart, which are always helpful. And anything to add last minute? No.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you for coming, giving up your evening. Okay, so I have Rachel Matthews next.
Good evening. After the last meeting, a councillor here branded us as a group of dangerous far-right extremists. In reality, we're unaffiliated individuals who are collectively very concerned about environmental issues and government policies, and we're hoping you can help us with our concerns. In the past, I've taken government advice and purchased a car I hated in order to do my bit for the environment. That was when diesel was considered good, until of course it obviously wasn't. Now the government say that electric vehicles are good for the environment. Considering how many times governments U-turn on what is good and what isn't, have members of the panel independently researched the environmental impact of making the batteries for the proposed electric bikes, scooters, buses, etc.? Do you know that in order to extract lithium, a single mine can use over 5,000 tonnes of sulfuric acid per day? To remove the acid, over 3,000 gallons of water is used per minute. Every year, that single mine produces over 350 million cubic yards of permanent waste laced with sulfuric acid and radioactive uranium. That information was provided by the US Bureau of Land Management about a mine in Nevada, and they anticipate what's left of the water supply in the area Indigenous people rely on could be contaminated for an estimated 300 years. Cobalt is also required for rechargeable batteries. In the last meeting, Councillor Moore asked about ensuring the council use ethically produced batteries. Your professional standards require you to adhere to ethical principles, so have you researched this further? Are you aware that unfortunately it isn't possible because 70% of cobalt is mined using child labour, which is mixed in the factories with the 30% that isn't? Professor Kara from Harvard University, a slavery researcher who visited these supposedly audited eco-mines in the Congo, where children work and die in unimaginably awful conditions, says there is no clean cobalt. There is not a single company on planet Earth that makes a device that has a rechargeable battery in it that can reliably and justifiably claim that their cobalt isn't coming from sources like that. Do not support this corporate greed and exploitation, especially when there are good green alternatives to EVs. And if there aren't any electric vehicles to charge, then the large ugly power lines marching across our countryside won't be needed either. So for the record, we do not consent to public money being spent on any lithium battery operated vehicle, which will cause exponential increase in mining devastation. So no matter how enticing the financial incentives are, can we have the council's absolute assurance that you will do what is right and not allow yourselves to be pressured by the government into actions that do more harm than good? Thank you.
Thank you. Which officer would like to take this one on?
Yeah, I can start.
Yes.
Yeah, so in response to the questions in terms of the first one about the researching the environmental impact of the batteries, yes, it's something that we have looked into, and we are aware that the environmental impact of producing lithium batteries is bad for the environment. I think producing anything has an environmental impact. So, for example, a normal car would also have environmental impact, and I'm assuming materials for that would also need to be mined and produced. I think with our approach, we try and look at the life cycle analysis of producing some of the batteries that we use. For example, in the electric bikes that the council has and uses within our operations, and also loans out to businesses. And due to the limited sort of tailpipe emissions from those bikes that we're aiming to swap for cars, I think there's an argument that in terms of the emissions impact, there is a lower impact. But perhaps more work needs to be done sort of on that, and perhaps some of that isn't just what lies with us, but in terms of the mining of the lithium, perhaps you need to look at actually mining that in a more environmentally friendly way and looking at local sort of ways to do that. I know they're looking at mines in Cornwall, for example, recently. Not saying they're going to be amazing, but it might be more local and therefore better able to mine that in a more ethically way, basically. And the second question, then going on to that sort of ethical production and the child slave labour, I think you kind of answered your own question. It's very difficult to get batteries that are produced in an ethically friendly way. I think we try to work with companies that have sort of corporate social responsibility as part of their sort of procurement processes, but obviously there's a limit to maybe how much can be done if they have that oversight of what's happening in other countries sort of far away. And then the last question about the council's assurance that we're trying to do things that are green, and you said not to be pressured by the government. I think we can lobby government on some things, but a lot of things are quite restrictive. We just get targets and ambitions, for example, the phasing out of petrol and diesel vehicles not to be sold by 2030 and beyond. It's not something that we've come up with. The government's very much come up with that, and we're trying to align our climate emergency action plan with that. And we do try and research all the actions that we've got in that plan. We do try and research those ourselves independently and consulting with lay experts in the community as well as academics to inform the development of those actions.
Thank you. Anything extra? You have 1 minute left, Ms Matthews.
Well, current vehicles do not pollute the environment for 300 years just to make a battery. And also there are green alternatives available. British company JCB has developed a zero emission hydrogen engine that the only thing that comes out of that is dry steam. So there are options like that for your fleet vehicles and the buses that should be looked at ahead of electric. And we need to set an example. If everybody boycotts the electric vehicle industry and doesn't support it, then this type of thing stops. And we have a duty as people and councillors to make sure these kind of atrocities do not happen. You should not be using batteries that do child labour or supporting any endeavours that do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. James O'Flynn.
Good evening. Sorry, I do apologize. We've got a few questions. First question is, how much influence does the panel have with Essex highways? And are the panel able to voice environmental concerns on our behalf to Essex, or is it that something we need to do directly? Next question, and the council reports its emissions in terms of tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent showing in TCO2e. Can you provide us with the data used in a methodology published by EcoAg, which shows they arrive at the figure and it's not been independently verified? Has the panel calculated the amount of CO2 which will be produced in making all electric vehicles they propose and scrapping existing fleet? And also, can the panel provide the data they use to calculate how many cars would it need to be off the road and using cycle lanes to make a noticeable difference to air quality in Colchester? A few more questions for you. With regards to the bike lanes and electric bike scheme, we request that the council do a full consultation with the public. Asking only 800 people when they're out for a day is not a proper consultation. Colchester has nearly 200,000 people in the area. Asking less than 1% is not democratic. Especially considering the cost of living crisis, people should be fully informed via newspapers and websites. You need to find out ahead of spending millions building cycle lanes if they are wanted and will be used. Regardless of whether it's down to Colchester or Essex, our roads are appalling, wrecking people's cars and endangering life. So a priority should be made to repair the roads the majority use and not spend millions on minority, no matter how well intentioned. And I have one more question. The data the Mayor of London used recently stating there was 4,000 deaths a year from air pollution were incorrect. When a member of the public did a freedom of information request, to the Office of National Statistics, it turned out to be just one death in the last 20 years, which was a child with a rare form of asthma and couldn't be exclusively put down to the traffic pollution. And that's me.
I mean, on the first question about influence we have with Essex Highways, as a panel, we can write to them, but that's really it. They are their own separate authority. You can contact them directly. You can contact the cabinet member directly. He's accessible via email to anyone in this room. And that would be something I would suggest doing, would probably be the best route. And the other questions, who would like to take on more of the data kind of questions? That you, Ben? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the question about the carbon emissions one. So you refer to the methodology provided by Eco Act.
Yeah.
That's just for the methodology they produce is just for estimating emissions associated with working from home. And that is a publicly available methodology. I'm happy to share the link to that. The methodology that we use for calculating the council's emissions is a greenhouse gas emissions calculator that's produced by an organisation called Local Partnerships in collaboration with the Local Government Association. And that uses emission factors produced by government. Essentially what that is like a particular activity produces X amount of emissions and you times it by what you're doing. So if it was per kilowatt hour of electricity used, there's an emission factor associated with the generation of that electricity. So you times up the amount that you use by that emission factor, and then that gives you your overall emissions for that particular activity. So both that calculator that we use and the government's emission factors about how we calculate that, they're all publicly available. And again, we can share that in a written response afterwards. I think, yeah, you can do, yeah. I think that I would see if Rosa wants to touch maybe on the fleet one, but I think we haven't, I wouldn't say we've calculated the amount of CO2 involved in producing all the electric vehicles that we plan to introduce as part of our fleet transition plan. I think we'd only be actually replacing our fleet when they sort of get towards the end of their actual sort of operational lifetime. So we'd be having to replace them with another alternative anyway. Obviously, the option of hydrogen was brought up as something that we need to research further, and it's probably less developed as a market from what I've seen at the moment, but obviously it will be looked into. And to be honest, I feel like the electric vehicles are better in terms of actually replacing with diesel, which would be sort of the business as usual alternative that we could have gone about. And then Emily, do you want to take the other question?
On the question of number of cars to take off the road to make a difference to air quality, that's something we could speak to Essex County Council about. They do the detailed air quality monitoring. They have more sophisticated monitoring tools and modelling, so I'm happy to go back to them and ask them whether they can provide that information. On the consultation side, the 800 people that we mentioned in the last meeting, that wasn't formal consultation, that was public engagement, talking to people at events. That isn't the information that Essex County Council use to make decisions about the highway. So that kind of information informs the projects that we deliver, the shared bike schemes and projects like that. But Essex County Council carry out their own formal consultations, and there's been a number over the past few years which have been publicly available and promoted in lots of different ways through events, pop-ups, social media, and other avenues. So it's Essex County Council that use their own consultations. Ours just sort of complements the information that they collect. But again, that could be something that Essex County Council can provide more information on in relation to consultation. And in relation to the funding, the government is very specific about what specific pots can be spent on, so it can't just be spent on sorting out the roads and potholes. We're constrained by government on what we spend the money on. The grants that we're successful in are for specific programmes and projects. And I just wanted to say that a lot of the projects we're running are to promote shared transport and not personal ownership. And obviously that means that there's a better distribution of resources and the ability for people not to have to own multiple different vehicles. By being able to share it, obviously that's much less of an environmental impact, both in terms of the number of vehicles you need in order for people to share them and in terms of the environmental impact during their life cycle.
Anything to add, Mr. Flynn? You've got another minute? You've got another minute? All good?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I next have Cheryl Taylor.
Yeah. Right, good evening all. Have the panel considered the dangers of electric vehicles in their planning, and has a fire service approved safety plan been created for dealing with the fires? A freedom of information request shows that in London in the last 5 years, there have been over 500 fires caused by the batteries in electric vehicles. Over 200 of the fires were cars, over 100 electric bikes, over 60 scooters, 19 buses and 10 HGV fires. The following information comes from a fire expert who holds a senior position in the fire service, training fire crews nationally and abroad. The fire service requires the burnt out vehicles to stay at the fire site for 24 hours due to the fact that they can reignite and explode. But if it's inside, the whole building has to be shut off for 48 hours. Sometimes a hole has been dug, filled with water, and the car or scooter has been pushed into it until it goes out. We have got enough issues with potholes, let alone car-sized ones. Is there a plan in place if there's a fire at an electric charging station or multi-storey car park, and how long these would need to be shut for, bearing in mind the number of electric vehicles that could ignite if one catches fire? Who would be responsible for the shutdown of the area, and would the council compensate any businesses that have to close for 24 or 48 hours? If an electric refuse lorry caught fire on a housing estate, have evacuation processes been put into place to get people away from the toxic fumes? Is the panel aware that whilst it's the fire service's responsibility for the polluted water runoff, they admit they're not able to secure the toxic water waste? So would the council take this responsibility? It can take 30,000 litres of water to put out an electric car fire. Do your current safety measures meet the latest fire service fire hazard guidelines? If not, we request that you draw up safety plans with the fire service for the existing electric scooters and fleet vehicles, and immediately remove the scooters until a fire service approved safety plan is in place and public safety can be guaranteed. As councillors and council officers, you have a duty of care to the public. The fire hazards of electric bikes and cars, etc., are well documented, which means any officer that recommends electric vehicles and councillors that authorise their use on the public could be held personally liable. As they have violated their duty of care, and indemnity insurance is unlikely to cover this. With all these points in mind, unless you can guarantee that they are 100% safe, we request that you don't go ahead with more electric vehicles, as we feel they are of great danger to the public and will eventually have to be scrapped, which will waste millions and won't help the environment, especially as there are safer, greener alternative options. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Which officer would like to take this one on? Thank you very much, Ben.
I think the quick sort of answer is that I'm sort of not the right person to really answer this, but I want to speak to sort of officers responsible for sort of the council's risk register and drawing up sort of safety risks. I think we do try, when we make decisions, to do a risk assessment ahead of things like procuring an electric vehicle or things like that, where it be the officer's responsibility to think about and to try and research the risks that occur. And I haven't been involved in the procurement of any of the council's electric vehicles, so I haven't looked at necessarily doing the risk assessments or know if officers have looked into that safety risk. It's something we need to look at after the meeting. But I think it is a valid point, and I think it's probably something we should look at as a council after, because it is something that the council is supporting with electric vehicle charge points and things like that. You probably do need to research the topic a little bit more and see what other organisations and authorities have done around the topic as well to help respond to the issue.
And I believe we do liaise with Essex Fire Service as well around risks, and they do full checks to make sure that they're happy with what's being installed. But you have an extra minute if you'd like it, or
You mentioned that the hydrogen engines aren't really up to scratch, but they've actually been in I remember going to the boat show early 2000s, and Honda had a hydrogen engine ready to go for a marine one back then. And then obviously it got put back, but I mean, they have been working on these engines for many, many decades. And JCB has one in a lorry right now, ready to go. So it's untrue that they are not effective. And, you know, if it's about the environment, then surely a little bit of steam coming out the back end of something is a lot better than whether it's being pollution out of whatever engines, or the potential risk of fire and lithium and poor little children digging up cobalt. So but they are available.
okay, thank you very much. That's something for us to keep an eye on, see how the technology progresses there.
Thank you.
Okay, so next I have Ian Drew.
Good evening. My question is really for the chairman. Your strategic plan for Colchester 2023 and onwards is all based around what you see as a climate emergency and your lust to achieve net zero. It's now more important than ever that all councillors fully understand what this means. There is other information you need to consider. If you knew that man-made climate change was not true, would you still go ahead with this strategy? Agenda 2021, now 2030, and the whole 15-minute city ideology is not grassroots initiative. You know it and we know it. It's a global initiative. The C40 Cities International Network of City Mayors, founded in October 2005, when Ken Livingstone was London Mayor, and now chaired by Sadiq Khan, is the template for the Great Reset. This is a top-down global plan to roll out the 17 Sustainable Development Goals under net zero. Whilst many in the Green Party and other climate activists are comfortable with net zero, it's doubtful that they understand the long-term implications of what this means. The aim of Agenda 2030 is absolute zero to be achieved by 2050, as laid out in the document produced by UK Fires and published in 2019. I have a copy of that if you want it. Absolute zero will mean no flying out of the UK, no shipping out of the UK. We will literally be imprisoned in our own island. Wood burners, gas and other fossil fuel appliances removed from every home, no fossil fueled vehicles, road travel to be 60% of the 2020 level. There will only be electric vehicle and train travel for people and freight. This is what top-down global control is all about. But it doesn't stop there. This has been planned since the 1970s, and we will be living in a zero trust world. We will have a digital ID with all our data linked to it by the end of this year. Central bank digital currency will soon follow. All this has got nothing to do with being green. Then we have traffic restrictions that clog up the road network and add to pollution. Just an excuse to bring in movement charging and encourage us to stay at home in our 15-minute or smart cities. The propaganda for this has already started with media advertising that says staying at home is the new going out. But not many people realise what is happening. We will have a City Move account linked to our phone and enforced by cameras, which we know are already being installed. These will track our every movement and we will be charged if we exceed our carbon footprint. Is this really the kind of future that you want for your children and grandchildren? So I ask again, if you knew that man-made climate change was not true, would you go ahead with this strategy? So let's have a proper public debate and let the people decide on what sort of future we want, not something forced upon us by central government who seem to have an endless supply of money to fund this anarchy. Total control by 1% who own 80% of the world's worth and still want more. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have to agree to disagree on some of those comments. This committee and council did declare a climate emergency. If you don't believe in climate emergency, that's absolutely fine. But we do. I can confirm there's no plans for congestion charge or 15-minute cities being talked about in Colchester at all.
As yet.
As yet, you know, 10 years it might happen, but
this is why we want a proper
it's-
public debate.
Well,
So you can put your side and we can put our side. I'm sure you've got experts you can use, as have we.
well, if you'd like a public debate, arguably the biggest debate is when we have a general election and you're welcome to stand
Yeah,
candidates with
that's
your beliefs.
Not
And
what I mean. We want the people who believe in this climate emergency to tell us why, and we will bring our experts to tell you our side of it.
Oh,
And
well,
it's
you're-
already all
yeah, of
right,
course.
you just tutting and
You're more than welcome to set up your own debate and invite whoever you like from the opposition
right.
and whoever you like who agrees with
But it's not
yourselves.
something you would entertain then.
Not us as a council, I'm afraid, but you'd be more than welcome to hire a venue in Colchester and have a big debate on it and organise your own people to come along.
And would you then come along?
If you invited me and I was free, I
Right.
guess I'd be happy to come along. We'll see what happens.
So we need to know when you're all going to be free because we want you all there. That's what a proper debate is about, because otherwise it's just being pushed through by government, which is directing you, and we're not. An election won't give us a say about it, will it? There's two parties in the election, and they're both on the same side when it comes to this.
Okay. I haven't got much more to add. If you want to host a debate and invite people from Colchester or around the country, you're more than welcome to.
Right. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And last speaker, I have Corinne Cooper.
Sorry, I was a backup from an earlier speaker.
Ah, okay. Thank you very much. Cool. Okay, thank you all for your contributions. So we move on to item 7, which is the waste and recycling update. So this panel has, most of us have been to the workshop that has been held by our waste and recycling team. Councillor Barber and McCarthy, you would have missed out on that due to being subs. But to tell you the truth, it was quite fascinating. Who would have think how we get rid of our rubbish is actually quite fascinating. So I guess I'll pass it over to you, Rosa, to just give us an update, really.
Yeah, sure. It is a report for information only, so we're not asking a decision from the panel this evening. And I'll just very briefly give you an overview. So the report sets out that we've appointed a consultant, which is Ricardo. They're an internationally renowned consultancy firm, so they're going to be supporting us as a panel and officers in the council in developing this strategy going forward. The report also sets out the timetable for workshops, and that's been developed, and the details of the activities in workshop 1 are set out within as well. The report goes on to also explain the difficult financial environments that we're currently working in, and some of the early decisions on changes to the recycling and waste service that have already been taken, but will be considered as part of that strategy development going forward. And then finally, just to mention that we are still waiting for the outcome of the DEFRA consultation, particularly on the consistency of household collections, which obviously will have quite a strong influence on the development of the strategy and the outcome of that. So we'll be expecting that fairly soon, and obviously we will feed that into the workshops and the development of that strategy too. Thank you.
Lovely. I have Councillor Barber first.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. This apologies if this was touched on in the workshop
I wasn't there, but just picking up on point 5.6 about the possibility of charging for recycling kit. Are you able to elaborate a bit more on that, please? Because I would feel that would be detrimental to our recycling rates if we were to do that.
Sure. As the paragraph earlier in that report around finance, the council's in a very difficult financial situation. So as part of the work with Cabinet and then at full council in January, February time, there was an agreement to look at an income around that particular element. I can't really give much more detail at this stage because it's still very early in the development of that project. But as with all of the other schemes that were agreed at that time, we'll be coming out and updating members as we develop that, and then obviously publicly once formal decisions have been made. But at this stage, no formal decisions outside of that outline of an income element. And this will, as I say, form part of the work that we're doing around the strategy as well.
Any other questions? Nope, that was probably an email coming in. Okay, well, you got away with it easy, Rosa. But I think a lot of this was discussed at the budget, so a lot of it we know. One was called into scrutiny on a Friday night. Let's have no more Friday night meetings. Brilliant. Okay, so this is just a note, and we're going to have more workshops and meetings on this as a panel. That obviously depends if we're still all on this panel after May, because people may wish to change panels. So we're just noting that one. So that takes us to item 8, which is the climate emergency plan. So I believe that's just a good update from you, Ben.
Yep. Owen, if you could bring up the slides on the screen to support the report. Okay. Yeah, okay, slides are live. Yeah, so this so at every meeting we normally bring an update on the climate emergency action plan. As this is the last panel meeting of the year, we've got a sort of a summary of the year and a recap of sort of progress made with actions within the action plan. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Owen. Yeah. So the structure is, we'll just give a little bit of an introduction about where the action plan is sort of situated within the council and who contributes to it. I'll go over the different action plan themes and talk about a summary of sort of key achievements and progress that we've made with it this year. Give a flavour of some of the actions that we're looking to do sort of coming up, the rest of 2023 and 24. And then I'll also make reference to a external review of our climate action that may be of interest to councillors as well. So you go to the next slide. Yeah. So in terms of where the action plan is situated, I'm going to make it quite clear that we're trying to sort of mainstream sort of considerations of environmental impact and sustainability throughout the whole council, and not have it just within a small sustainability team. So the action plan is sort of populated and monitored by officers across the whole of the city council, obviously crossed into a wide variety of areas, as we'll talk about in the themes section. It's also aligned with other key strategic priorities that the council has. So in terms of sort of economy and sort of supporting local employment, obviously that very much aligned with some of the environmental impact, and upskilling local businesses to become more sustainable and support green agendas like the retrofit agenda. A lot of our actions obviously support improving health and well-being, so encouraging active and sustainable travel, using and experiencing green spaces for the mental health benefits that they have, and also obviously community enabling is very much embedded within a lot of our projects. For example, enabling the community set up shared cycle hubs. Also trying to integrate the action plan within the city centre development, so the city centre master plan. So we're trying to obviously see how people can travel through more sustainable means into the city centre, as well as through some of the town deal work that looks at introducing cycle lanes, for example, from Greenstone and the university into the city centre as well. The action plan is very much more than just the City Council. We obviously partner with a lot of organisations. Just a few of them are listed on screen, and obviously we can't make the widest environmental impacts sort of within the wider city and borough without having these groups on board. And it's also very much not just about reducing carbon emissions, although we do have a net zero target for the council. We are doing a lot of these actions for other benefits. So you've got co-benefits, like I've talked about, the health and well-being benefits of some of the actions and how they can support community sort of enabling, but also other wider environmental improvements that can result from some of the environmental actions. So improvements in air quality, supporting wildlife and biodiversity as examples. So go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the themes of our climate emergency action plan. So we've very much got a set focus on reducing the emissions from our own buildings and fleet. As I said, we've got a target to reduce emissions of our operations to 0 by 2030. We've also got bits on there about producing renewable energy that the council's involved with. We've got a separate one on biodiversity and protecting the natural environment, sustainable and active travel, sustainable waste management, partnerships and community action, planning, built environment and the green economy, and also changing the way we work as a council to become more sustainable thinking. And then a new theme that we've added in this year's action plan that was published in January was about climate change adaptation and realising that there are sort of serious impacts that are happening as a result of climate change, changes to weather patterns, more severe weather events, more droughts, that we need to think about and adapt the way we work as a council to consider that. So next slide. So yeah, this is the first of a couple of slides that go through some of the key progress and achievements. All of this is detailed within the report as well, so feel free to comment on that. So in terms of our decarbonisation within our buildings, we've begun, well, we have worked with a consultant to identify decarbonisation actions within several of our key buildings, buildings that are high emitters, but also ones that might be harder to decarbonise, and we need support with those. Some of our heritage buildings, for example. These will obviously produce emission savings, but also cost savings as well, some of them. So it's important that we consider those in light of the sort of cost of living crisis. Introduction of electric vehicles, I think we've spoken enough about already, but we've already introduced 6 electric vans into our fleet. And also partnering organisations like the Parking Partnership have got some electric vehicles, and Helpline have got some hybrids as well. On the renewable generation side, we are looking at the feasibility of creating a solar park on the outskirts towards the north of Colchester to provide renewable electricity, sort of in the early stages, but that would look to power the new Northern Gateway development that's being constructed. In terms of our green spaces, we've done a sort of very much a change to the approach of how we maintain those. So looking to take a more approach on naturalization and letting sort of wildlife grow and rewild. And we've also taken actions to reduce the use of chemical pesticides like glyphosate to reduce damage to the natural environment as well there. Pictured on the slides are the Cheviot goats that are at Highwoods Country Park that are being used to graze part of the site to help restore the meadow that was once there. On the tree planting side, it's something that the council has done a lot of work on, but we do realise it has to be done in balance with managing biodiversity on some sites, but we are looking to work with community organisations as much as possible with that. We built up a recent partnership with a charity called Marketfield Grows that provides work opportunities for young adults with learning disabilities to help do our tree planting with us, which is really positive. Supporting innovative forms of travel. So this relates to things like electric cargo bikes that we're supporting, that we've loaned out to businesses and use ourselves to help transport goods instead of by cars and vans. And obviously people would have seen the electric scooters that people use to get around, many as an alternative to using cars, which is obviously positive. Wayfinding and travel infrastructure, we've also done work. One of the main projects on that is a project called Fixing the Link, which aims to encourage walking between the main train station, North Station, and the city centre, and encouraging that link up there. And on equality awareness and behaviour change, we've had a awards or recognised project that aims to raise awareness about air quality and air pollution, and the changes that people can make to help reduce air pollution. For example, switching off car engines when they're stationary at traffic lights for long periods. We go to the next slide. Yep. So on the sort of waste side, we've tried to enable communities to keep their local spaces litter free. For example, the introduction of litter picking hubs, which provide litter picking equipment for the community to do sort of litter picks on the go, and then we pick up the litter that they have bagged up. We also, in terms of the community side, we have had attendance this year at many community events, community fetes, in Grinstead, Myland, Monkwick, Wivenhoe. We try to attend a lot of those to show the community what we're doing, and if anyone again has any ideas of places that we can do events and talk to people about our work, then obviously please let us know. We welcome that. As I said before, we can't do this work on our own, so we also have to work collaboratively with what's called sort of anchor institutions within the borough. So these sort of key organisations like the university, Colchester Institute, big players that have similar challenges to us as well, to sort of share knowledge about what we're doing. And then on skills and training for businesses, a lot of businesses are trying to figure out how to become more environmentally sustainable, not just for the environmental impacts, but also the opportunities there are for cost savings for them. We've linked up to promote support provided by a organisation called Colby, which stands for Colchester Business Enterprise Agency, which run a support programme introducing businesses to sort of environmental sustainability concepts. And Colchester Institute have also introduced a course on carbon literacy for businesses as well, which we're promoting. And then widely sort of integrating sustainable thinking and behaviours at the council is something we're trying to do. So, for example, within our project management process, officers have to consider the environmental impacts of the decision making alongside other sort of things that have been around for a long time, like equality impact assessments and risk assessments. That's becoming now a staple. We're also trying to encourage sustainable travel to work. So we've run doctor bike maintenance and repair sessions for staff who work up at Shub Depot, and also help to fund a new bike shelter up there, which provides more secure storage so they can feel safe in the knowledge that when they come back from their shifts, their bike will still be there. Next slide. So next step, so touching on what I said about looking at the opportunities for reducing emissions from our buildings, we've now got a set of measures that we are thinking that are worth recommending, and what we need to then do is build up a plan to identify what the measures are, the costs of installing each of those measures, the savings that are produced both in terms of the emissions but also cost savings, and timeline when these can be done. So that's a key thing that we need to look at going forward. We'll further be looking at increasing engagement and awareness on sustainable travel and air quality. At the last panel meeting, I think we made reference to a bid that we put into DEFRA, most recent one, for about 310,000. And since that meeting, we have heard news that that bid was successful. So we'll be able to, as part of that bid, we've got more funding for 2 extra officers to help increase engagement with businesses and schools around air quality and the changes that they can make to improve those. We've also got, a part of that, plans to redevelop a cycle Colchester map, so giving people better information about where cycle routes are in Colchester so that they're more informed. As we mentioned, the secure cycle park will be opening soon this year, and integrated within that will be a shared e-cargo bike and electric bike hub where people can borrow these bikes on a pay-as-you-go basis for journeys that they might wish to make instead of a car. we're also working with the local community in Newtown to set up a similar hub in that area as well. Improving signage of walking and cycling routes. So I touched on that with fixing the link, but we've also got some projects down by the Hive and towards the university that again aim to encourage walking and cycling and improving directions and so people know where they're going. Right cycling way strategy, Rose has touched on that. We'll be developing a new one, so I'm not going to speak too much about that. 3 new SPDs. So SPDs are supplementary planning documents, and we've produced, we are producing 3 new ones on climate change, biodiversity and active travel, which aim to provide increased guidance to developers about ways that we can promote these concepts within new developments. The biodiversity one is currently out for consultation, and the other 2 are within the draft stage. But these provide sort of material considerations that planning officers have to look at when developers submit their proposals. And also, we are looking to support more residents to increase their access to energy efficiency grants. This is something that the government's been quite supportive of, particularly for residents on lower incomes and or receiving eligible benefits and support. Again, we've made another bid as part of the consortium to hopefully get access to further grant funding to increase energy efficiency of domestic properties. Next slide. Yeah, and this is just wanted to touch on about the external review of our climate work. So it's not just sort of us, is us coming up with the actions, but it's not just us assessing it. We are getting externally reviewed. This is by an organisation called Climate Emergency UK, who have worked to develop a set of criteria to assess local authority climate action. Previously, they looked at scoring all local authority climate emergency action plans specifically towards the end of 2021, and they published scores in 2022. And this is what the score that the council got, which is above the average district score, but we noticed that there was areas for improvement, which we feel like we have taken on and used within our production of our new climate emergency action plan. But as I said, they're now looking at what action has been taken, as plans defined, but actions are more important. So they are looking at rating all local authority climate action and producing results in terms of how effective that has been, and issuing bits for improvement, because they're very much a critical friend. They aim to support local authorities with climate action, but also hold us to account with what we're doing as well. So I think that's the end of the slide. So I think the ask of councillors is really it was really a show of recap, but also obviously it does go into next steps as well. So if there's areas where you will feel that we should be focusing on more, then please let us know and we can consider that within our work going forward.
Sorry, sir, but you've had your say, but it's now down to the panel. Ben, just a quick one on there, the 52% score. So do they give us critical feedback of what we could improve on? And if so, what did they suggest we do need to improve to get a higher score?
Yeah, so the 52% score was from last year. I remember some of the things were about making sure that we try and consider the impact that some of our action has on sort of inequalities, but also how the public can be more informed about our action plan and how we can make it slightly more engaging. We feel like we've tried to take that on. I can't remember all of the other things because it was done sort of more than a year ago, but we did do like a thorough review of that, and where we think we could take actions to improve it, we did, but some of the things weren't necessarily relevant for our level of local authority, but yeah.
Great. Any questions from the panel? Councillor Gocher.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Ben. It's an excellent action plan. Really interesting. I've just got a number of little points and questions. First of all, in terms of community events, I'm sure you may have done this, but did we go to the Eco Festival, which is now happening pretty much it is every year at the moment. So that would be obviously a good place to advertise our activities. Secondly, I was interested in, the idea of the solar park, in the Northern Gateway. I'm just wondering if we've got solar panels on the buildings and what kind of coverage we've actually got on the roofs of the build there, because obviously the more we can get on buildings, the less we have to put them on green fields, although that may sometimes be necessary. Oh yes, in terms of sustainable thinking permeating all our activities, thinking about a little issue I encountered this week. How are we on the board of this town deal? Have we got an ecological input into that? I was thinking about an issue I had with Trinity Churchyard earlier in the week. Those are my main little questions.
Yeah, okay, take them on there.
Yeah. Yes, on the community events, we were at the Eco Festival, but I think we're minded that we don't want to just talk to environmentally friendly and eco-minded individuals. So we do want to try and attend sort of a wide variety of different community events that will attract different people. And again, we welcome ideas for those if people have them. On the solar part, I think sort of rooftop solar PV. So we do have them on some of our buildings. So yeah, the sports park, which up there does have, part of Leisure World does have, although there is increased scope for looking at other parts of the roof, we could increase that, and we are looking at doing that. But yeah, it is something that we do actively and will be actively considering more. I won't comment on the town deal because I don't think I'm sort of involved enough to be able to comment on that.
I'll pick up the point on the town deal board. Yeah, yes, the council is represented on the town deal board.
I should say, every time I attend a fun day, I see Ben and his team there as well. So they do make sure that they branch out across Colchester, talking to different communities, which is very helpful. So I have Councillor Ellis and then Councillor Sunnock. So Councillor Ellis first.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ben. I think having climate emergency action plan demonstrates, actually this does demonstrate that we are taking action, as you've taken us through a very long programme of action points, whether people agree with the methodology we're employing or not. The fact is we are taking action. It's excellent. I do have just some quick questions as I've read through it. One of your points is collected 110 bikes through community cycle project. I just wondered if we'd done a cost benefit analysis of that. I'd just like to understand whether it was worth doing or whether it's worth buying new bicycles, as in sometimes recycling things is more expensive than starting from scratch. I just want to understand it. And on that point, I think that we ought to make more of the fact that I think you're talking about 750 bikes, is it, in Grinstead, and where that funding is coming from. It doesn't explain where that funding is coming from. We know it's from the town deal, but residents who are having to pay additional council tax may not realise it's coming from there and not us funding 750 additional bicycles in Grinstead. I've put a mark next to tree planting Maya-Wacky Forest, just to remind me to talk to you about that, because I'd like to come and see where we're doing that at the school. There's a build on master plan for Cymbeline Meadows to be a nature reserve, including creating new habitats and management of the site to support biodiversity. That's on page 28. Again, it's an area that's very popular with the public for dog walking, etc. And again, are we segregating the two? I mean, dog walking and the public access doesn't always work with nature reserve. So I just want to understand what we're doing there. I've got that's to do with we've said that already. Hydrogen has come up tonight, and it's just to point out Aberdeen have got 85 hydrogen powered vehicles, I think, a fleet of at the moment, including a waste vehicle. So it does work, and the technology's there. I think it's a European initiative they were working with, and I think some of those have got to go back in June 23. But it's still something that we ought to be looking at, and I do agree with people when they're talking about the issues we have with cobalt and cobalt mining. And I think hydrogen probably will be the way forward. I can see EV being the interim, but I think hydrogen will be the way forward, and I'd like us to look at that. And I'd like us to look at that before we go investing in a large solar park in the north of the borough, if I'm honest, having spent the last few weeks searching solar parks because I had to come and talk at planning last week. Another thing, just because you've talked about the biodiversity SPD, I'm getting quite concerned. We all follow, or some of us look at Twitter and what have you, some of the feeds I look at, things about plastic grass. And I am getting increasingly concerned about the amount of plastic grass that's being used, not necessarily in the borough, but across the country. And there was an article in one of the papers at the weekend about plastic grass being put down by a developer in every house within a housing development. And people didn't have an option whether they had a plastic lawn or not. They just had a plastic lawn. Plastic gets very hot in the summer. It needs cleaning. It needs chemical cleaning. It's incredibly bad for the environment. It doesn't give any biodiversity. I know we're going to have a biodiversity net gain they've got to produce, but I am really concerned that we need to look at, as an authority, plastic grass and whether we can do something to stop its use in development. Whether I'd like to ban it completely. I'm not sure that we're in a position to ban it completely, but I would like something from planners to be able to stop developers putting it down as a matter of course within the development. I don't know whether that's something that would have to come back as a point for another meeting, Chairman, or whether it's something I think I've got till the 22nd of March to respond to the SPD, so I may have to stick it in there. And that's probably me for the time being, but a very good piece of work and a good report. Thank you, Ben.
To respond?
Yeah, so I'm going to dish out a few to other people because it strays into their bits. But the bits that I can talk about, so actually the last point on the biodiversity SPD, I think it was pretty much short, it was after one of these panel meetings that someone raised about the plastic grass and making sure that was considered as something that we didn't want to support within the SPD. So I'm pretty sure that got included because I did make a suggestion for that, and I think it got included, but we will definitely check that if it's not. Okay, we'll make sure that it is. And hopefully it also might be picked up by consultees as well, but we'll pick that up. I'll first go to Rosa to talk about some of the Cymbeline Meadows.
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up two of your points, so Cymbeline Meadow and the hydrogen. So in terms of Cymbeline Nature Reserve, you're right in terms of our considerations about balancing people and nature and biodiversity, and that was something that we were strongly fed back on as part of the Woodland and Biodiversity Project, and that we weren't properly considering it. Had we done the right things with the proposals and projects that we put forward in year one of that project, so we're in year 5 of that. There are 5, don't ask me what they are, but there are 5 key principles of that project, but I know that one of them is very much about balancing the need for people and biodiversity, making sure that we work together so that people can benefit from these beautiful places. So that will be very much part of our thinking with that scheme. In terms of where we're at the moment, we've got outline plans for that, where they were starting to share, undertaking all the various different assessments from the ecological aspects through to the archaeological as well, because we are Colchester after all. So we'll be sharing more of those plans as we go forward, but very much considering just it being a nature reserve and just for biodiversity, but for people to access as well. So yeah. Second point on hydrogen. So we've got a fleet transition plan that was agreed by the council, I think in about 2020, that set out how through the climate action plan we will look and work to transition our fleet from current diesel to zero emissions, or as close as possible to that by 2030. Within that, again, we've got certain principles. We aren't committing to a certain direction. We're open to whatever is available on the market, whatever is proven, and using data to inform that. So the work that we've been doing, we've been looking at different fuels. We've been trialling different vehicles. The biggest factor or the biggest hurdle at the moment is the large HGV fleet, because that's the vehicles, I suppose, that are slightly behind. So vans and cars are much more developed in those areas. But I have got colleagues, and the beauty of working in local government is that you can connect with other local authority peers, and those that are taking on different types of vehicles. We can talk to them, we can find out their learning, understand the impact, etc., etc. So we're doing that already, and there are colleagues across Essex that are changing their fleet, including hydrogen being one of them. They haven't got it yet, but we'll be working with them to understand, the impact, what's the changes, how does it work, so that we can learn from others, because it's really important that we make really sound decisions using public funding to invest in this kind of technology. So we're very open to whatever it may be, and we'll look at all of those options and set cases out really clearly.
I think the other questions are mainly on some bike related ones, so I'll hand over to Emily for that.
So the bike project isn't one of our projects, it's run by the communities team, but I don't know whether they've done a cost benefit analysis, but I think with all the bikes they've collected, what they're doing is using parts of some bikes that wouldn't be cost efficient to repair and using them on other bikes. So I think they'll only be sort of repairing the bikes that are cost efficient to repair, and then the rest of it will either be donated somewhere else or scrap metal recycled. So yeah, I should imagine that is the approach they're taking, but I can find out.
Brilliant. Okay, Councillor Sunnox, do you want to unmute yourself? There you go.
Yes, apologies for not being there in person. I came in for a meeting last night and it took me over an hour to get in, given the traffic from my home in rural North Ward. I wanted to pick up on the recycling 52%, and I'm going to show my ignorance here. I visited a private sector recycling facility, and they claimed percentages in the 90%. And when I asked questions about how that was achieved, they claimed that they were bailing up the residual waste and sending it off to incinerators, some of them on the continent, where it was being used to fuel sort of heat schemes. And I just wondered about the economics of that and whether that was something that would be viable. This may be for Ben or it may be for Rosa. I wondered about the economics of it and whether it would be viable for Colchester to look at. When I looked at the costings of the private sector operator, it was actually paying for my business considerably cheaper than using Colchester, and it was requiring less division of waste into different types of recycling product. So a few questions there about the recycling we're doing.
Okay, so I'll take that. So we, as Colchester City Council, are the waste collection authority, and that is our role and responsibility, whereas Essex County Council are the waste disposal authority. And so there are legal obligations on each of us as authorities in those roles. And in effect, Essex County Council give us directions on how the waste is disposed of. So the residual waste I'm talking about is the black bags or black bins waste. So Essex County Council have the responsibility for that. Now, what I can say and what has been presented to this panel previously, both in September and I think early in March last year, is that Colchester as part of an Essex Waste Partnership with Essex County Council and other Essex authorities. And we are currently in the process of reviewing the joint municipal waste management strategy. Within that will be not only how we collect material, both residual and recycling, but also how those materials are then treated. So there is an opportunity for councillors and the public eventually, I think later this year, to feed into that as part of the consultation of that strategy. So I think there's the opportunity to do that at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, William. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Firstly, I wanted to just say how excellent the work is that we're doing with Market Fields, because that's really a good partnership working where there's a lot of young adults who leave special education schools and struggle to get employment. I think that's, I actually met with them today on a local project, and I was really pleased to hear about the collaboration that was ongoing between us. So real good credit there for the team working to develop that relationship. On the cycle training, I was wondering if there's any scope to expand that, and if able you perhaps be able to give a bit more detail about how successful that seems to be, because a lot of people, particularly on the rural areas just outside of urban Colchester, where I represent quite a lot of those areas, people want to cycle a bit more into the centre. They want to get to the stations, other hubs like Northern Gateway, but they don't feel confident to necessarily cycle even where there's good cycle infrastructure. Now, obviously, part of that is they're going down 60 miles per hour where there's no segregated cycle lanes, but there's also just a general confidence at cycling. So if we could look at how we might be able to expand that, a bit of detail on some of the successes around that, that'd be welcome. And then I did have another point, but I have, oh yes, Leisure World. When I previously sat on this board, Leisure World came up as quite a significant challenge for us in respect of our CO2 emissions. And I was wondering if there was any updates on progress in respect of Leisure World, particularly because I know with the pool, that's quite a challenge for us. And in particular with the cost of energy right now, I imagine that's been a significant liability for us. I know there was some government help announced at the budget, but I was just wondering if you had a bit more detail around Leisure World and what work we're doing there. Thanks.
I'll pass over to Emily for the cycle training first.
So we've still got funding for free cycle training. Essex County Council have also got funding for cycle training. So there's lots of scope for more people to do the training. We've been asking the people that have done the training for feedback, and it's all been really, really positive so far. Very much saying that it really improves their confidence. There's also the 3 levels. So if people don't feel ready to do an advanced level, there's just the cycle confidence, and the trainer will take them on a route of their choice, and then sort of help build up their confidence and give them sort of tips on how to cycle to national standards and how to position themselves on the road to increase their visibility and increase their confidence with drivers. So I think we've sort of now gathered quite a lot of good evidence that we could use for sort of local promotion. I think it's probably about how we improve how we get that information out and get it out to other areas of Colchester. I think, you know, we've probably got a few case studies that we could use to illustrate it. So I think that's definitely an area we need to look at because we want more people to take up this training. So anything we can do to get it out there. And of course, councillors are welcome to link people into, I can share the link and perhaps a few pointers, and you're welcome to share that with any of your constituents who want to take up the training.
Yeah, and then the second point was about Leisure World. So Leisure World was one of the buildings that received a heat decarbonisation plan by the consultant that we worked with on that. We're still at the stage where we're identifying the suitable measures, but as part of our carbon reduction plan, there will be measures considered for Leisure World. And you're right, it is quite a complex building. There are a number of options that we are looking at, but I'm not necessarily sure if we can talk about them just yet because they're probably not far enough down the line. But there will be progress made on that sort of in the coming months, and it's being looked at. Yeah.
So looking at direction at other things to look at, two things I'd like us to look at, especially around engagement as well, is expanding the no-mow concept and engaging councillors about areas that councillors would like to see, and they can consult residents. So I think that would be something moving forward that would be really helpful. And the second one is what Stuart Johnson mentioned about bike hangers. I've mentioned them before. I'm thinking, do we look at pilots in areas like Greenstead, where there's lots of flats, people can't store a bike, and that could be their children as well that can't store a bike at the moment. And it's also one of the areas with the lowest car ownership. So for me, there's an opportunity there. And then there's areas like Monkwick, which also have large council estates as well, that we own. So I'm wondering, some liaising with Colchester Borough Homes on that would be really helpful, moving forward into the next electoral year. They're two areas I think would be really good moving forward, because we've done a lot on opening the bike hub, which will get open eventually, let's hope. It's been a while, but we actually need to look at where people store it when they're home, because security is a big issue. Bike crime, moped crime, all of that seems to be going up in Colchester. So anything we can do to make sure that someone comes home and know in the morning their bike will be there will be, I think, the way forward. And looking at London councils that have them, they're usually restricted to using the roads, which does take parking spaces. Actually, in Colchester, we've got more space on those estates that we can use more appropriately for bike shelters that will be secure, locked with a fob, so only people who have the fob can actually get their bike out. But that'd be really, I think that's where I'd like to look at. I don't know how other panel members feel on that as well. Likes the no-mo, excellent. And also the no-mo does save us money. We can say to ID Verdi, you don't need to cut this area. That's one less area they need to go to. Councillor Barber.
Thank you. One area where I do think that we could perhaps install more cycle storage, and I think it's one of the challenges we have in Colchester, is the provision of secure bike storage, would be some of the areas in our car parks, multi-storey car parks, because often when you look, there is areas of concrete not being used for anything effectively, that we could maybe install secure cycle storage there. And I think also strategic locations at the bottom of the hills would be useful. When I cycle into the office, when I'm going in, I tend to not always go up the hill. I tend to stop at the bottom. If there was secure cycle storage, for example, at the bottom, it could be a strategic location where actually people don't feel they have to get to the top of the hill all the time, because that's obviously off-putting for a lot of people. They have to take their bike up the hill, which in itself is not easy for a lot of people. So I know a lot of that will be highway licensing and authority, but I do think that if we can look at strategic locations, maybe tie in with sponsorship to fund those. I may be making arguments I've made at Essex as well, but if we look at some of the sponsorship opportunities that go with that, we could help fund it in a more cost neutral way. But that would be my suggestion, to look at it as well, some of our assets. Thanks.
I think I'd agree to that as well. And 106 money, there's a lot of building going on in the town centre, whether that's shops being converted to the flats or so forth. I don't know whether there's an opportunity, because some of these can be low cost. And you make a perfect point about the car parks. For example, St Mary's has the bike racks outside, and if it's chucking it down with rain, you're coming back to a very wet bike, when actually they could be next to the ticket machines where there's just empty space. So I think there is an option there, talking to a parking team, where that could even be just a matter of moving the iron bars and having CCTV on top of them as well to keep them secure. Councillor Rippingale.
So I've probably mentioned this before, but I'd be really keen for us to investigate how we can extend the provision of free bikes. Obviously, I know the current deal for Grinstead is funded through the town deal, but I'd be really keen to see that expanded into areas of deprivation such as Newtown, Shrub End and Monkwick. Because, you know, cycling can come across as quite an elitist hobby or way of transport. So for me, I feel like for us to properly affect real change in Colchester, we would need to perhaps look at a way to, even if it's subsidised bikes, to enable our residents to access schemes and actually partake in car-free travel.
Is that one that could come through the recycle scheme that we do with bikes? Or is that predominantly already going to Grinstead?
You mean the Essex pedal power, or the community recycling?
The community recycling one.
I mean, yeah, I think the community recycling, I need to catch up with the communities team and find out who the bikes are going to. I think that basically they've been approached by different community groups. And so it's more on a group basis, but then I think they have been giving them out to individuals that have approached them. So I can find out a bit more about how they're distributing them. I'm not sure what the plans are for future years, because obviously it is quite a big officer resource. But I can find out, I'll find out some more.
I'm wondering as well, is it worth us, this might become a bigger project, maybe working with schools, for example, who can identify families that might need that support. But I'll pass over to Councillor Rippingale, who just wanted to come back there.
You know, I'd be really keen to explore, you know, the community asset-based development on this. We're obviously starting that work with the Newtown Bike Hub. There should be other opportunities for us to make this perhaps a more formal scheme. I know on Facebook, like in our Newtown community group, there are people actively giving away bikes, and then they're, you know, having community activists who are involved with cycling are having to signpost them. So actually, if we could improve our comms around that and perhaps work with community organisations who are able to, as Lee says, identify those people who need them, but also make it aware for the public that they don't have to go out and buy a new bike. You know, I think that's going to be key in looking at this slightly different and making it slightly more formal.
Councillor Barber.
I don't know if, because I can see Julian's on the call, and I don't know if it was appropriate, Julian from Essex Highways, whether he wanted to comment on Essex pedal power at all, or if he would rather wait until his item next. But I didn't know if there was anything he needed to add at this point, or if he was I'm sorry, if he was fine with waiting to his agenda item.
If you do want to speak, put your hand up, Julian. Oh, there you go, you've unmuted. Go for it.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm part of Essex Pedal Power as well, and it would be great to expand it to other areas. Of course, the challenge would be to secure further funding, because we secured funding not only from the town deal, but also from Sport England as well, through the local delivery pilot. So we would need to identify further funding opportunities. Yeah, I mean, you know, colleagues at Essex County Council and I, that is our ambition, and we will be considering all opportunities for further funding and for further rollouts to introduce the benefits to a wider cohort of residents.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, any more steers on this? Because our main recommendation is to comment and to give any more ideas of where we'd like this panel to go. But if everyone's happy with the few suggestions we've chucked in there. Okay. Brilliant. Right. Okay, do people want a short break before the last panel? Yep, so quick comfort break, cup of water, toilet, so forth. We'll meet back at past, so just 6 minutes. Back on the live feed or all good? Excellent. If everyone can get quiet now, please. So we're moving to item 9, which is air quality schools activity. So before I pass this over to Emily, just the recommendations I'll go through. So recommended decision for the panel to support and help facilitate the ongoing educational approach to changing driver behaviour. Okay, we'll just pause. Sorry, just waiting for some people to quiet down. Okay, so start again. So we are on item 9, which is air quality in schools activity. Recommended decisions for the panel to support and help facilitate the ongoing educational approach to changing driver behaviour around schools in relation to engine idling, active travel. 2.2, to support ECC's plans, Essex County Council, for school streets and the carless or careless pollution campaign by providing funding where possible, particularly towards healthy school streets, use community connections to help develop a volunteer network to increase capacity and therefore localised action, provide names, contacts and introductions at local schools, and encourage schools to engage and take up support offered. So I will pass it to you, Emily.
So as per the panel's request at the last meeting, Julian and I are here to give you a presentation. Julian's going to present on school streets and I'm going to present on careless pollution, give you a bit more detail about the specific work with schools. I'm not sure how we're set up. Who do you want us to go first in terms of? Julian, do you want to go first? Or do you want me?
Yeah, happy to go first. Is someone going to share the slides? Okay, the slide's showing. Yeah, okay. So the first thing I want to say is that essentially Essex County Council are trying to create the conditions for as many children as possible to walk, wheel or cycle to school as possible, for them to maintain their health and well-being, and also if we can then take the pressure off of congestion around school gates and help to reduce emissions. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to say is that we are evolving our own model in Essex. So it's not the Southend model and it's not the Hackney model. Well, I say not the Southend model. The approach that's being taken in Southend is whereby schools and parent volunteers are undertaking a time closure using the gates that you can see in the image, the yellowy orange caterpillar gate that can be closed off to close the street for a very short time to prevent vehicular traffic. However, I say that we're not taking that approach, but it is an option, and I'll come on to explain our options in a moment. It is an option if schools are, and the school and parent community are interested in taking that approach. And I also mentioned that we're not the Hackney model. The Hackney model is starting from a point of enforcement, time closures in the morning and the afternoon, going straight to enforcement with ANPR cameras. This probably works in places like Hackney, where it's very dense and there are a lot of pupils who live within a close proximity to the school, and less choice, and fewer children travelling further to school. But there are challenges with it in that you can end up with traffic displaced to other streets. So all of that taken into consideration, we developed our own school street model for Essex. Next slide, please. And really that is about recognizing that we can sort of move towards an enforcement approach if that's what parents and schools want, but that certainly isn't our starting point. Our starting point is to encourage, to look at rewards and incentives, to make some physical changes around schools, to make the school street area more conspicuous so that we raise awareness of drivers and make them aware that they are driving in a zone where there are school children and lots of movements, and things like traffic calming and improved road safety measures. This can be implemented with things like street art and more sort of bold approaches to approaching schools, as well as reward schemes. We work with the parking partnerships on the 3PR, 3 parking rules projects, and we're implementing several new park and stride locations. That can be really helpful for parents, whereby we have a designated car park with an incentive for some free parking for short periods in the morning and afternoon. And then we have volunteers then who can, and parents, walk, cycle or wheel the children for the final stage of the journey into school. So our approach is flexible, it's iterative, it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. And really at the heart of it, I suppose it's about bringing schools and communities with us on a journey to encourage that change in attitude and behavior and habits, and do it in a way that's very bespoke to each school, finding really what works locally and which is the best solution. Next slide, please. So we have this, what we call our blueprint approach. So in our blueprint 1 schools, we've got some new bollards, some street art, some new signage, just trying to change the look and feel so that drivers behave differently, they recognize they're coming into a different area. And then we have a lot of engagement and work with the schools and local community to say, well, what could the next step be? What are the other sorts of solutions that we could implement, and subject to securing funding? Then you could look at that South End model of those experimental time closures, raised tables, more crossings, crossing points, in some cases, segregated cycle infrastructure, a number of different sort of physical and behavioral interventions that over time starts to change attitudes and behavior. And then that can move on to other approaches to prioritize walking, cycling and wheeling. It can include enforcement if people want it. And ultimately, I suppose over time, we end up with a transformed street where it's much more comfortable and safe for children to access their schools, and in a way that builds a consensus in communities and builds an encouragement for traveling to school in a very different way, and changes over time. Next slide, please. And this approach is sort of based on 3 tiers. So we envisage that schools will be either in tier 1, 2 or 3. There'll be some schools that are highly engaged and want to do quite a lot. They may be interested in further enforcement. They may have lots of volunteers and lots of staff engaged in this agenda. There will be other schools in a sort of tier 2 who've got some appetite, but they may need things like vegetation cutting back and a toolkit of behavior change interventions and incentives, and working with us to develop a network of volunteers and marshals. And then there may be other schools who do probably a bit less, but they're interested in things like the Daily Mile, other walking incentives, having a school travel plan. So there are a number of different levels, and we recognize that all schools will be at different stages, have very different challenges, and therefore the opportunities will be bespoke. But our ambition and plan is to have something for for any type of school who wants to encourage walking, cycling and wheeling and reduce traffic congestion and emissions around the schools. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a summary of sort of some of the things that are happening in Colchester. So that blueprint one that I mentioned, where we're trying to make the area more conspicuous, improve the signs and lines, etc. We've got some of that going on in some of the schools, and some 20 mile per hour signage going in there. And then we've got ongoing engagement, and this is where we can work with Emily and the team to progress the anti-idling campaigns, and starting to undertake surveys and work with those school communities and pupils to identify the very specific challenges and what some of those solutions can look like. And that's an ongoing process. And as we build up an evidence base and we build a consensus for change, then we'll be well placed to implement those changes over time. And what we've learned from other school streets projects around the country, that as you start to introduce these sorts of measures, it quickly becomes a part of the school culture, and new habits get formed. Parents get used to new systems, if that's park and stride, drop-off points, so that as systems get put in place, each cohort in each year get used to those changes and respond accordingly. And over time, you can really improve the active travel take up, and really to make it much safer around schools, and improve the air quality and really improve the school environment. So that is a sort of summary of our ambition and the things that we're doing at the moment. And we really look forward to working with Colchester City Council to take this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Before we pass to Emily, any questions? I've got Councillor Gocher first.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, the only thing that does concern me a bit is it does seem to me, from my instinct, all a bit woolly and a bit motherhood and apple pie. I mean, obviously, it depends on what the evidence base suggests works. I mean, my instinct does think that we probably need to take a bit more of a tougher approach with a vociferous minority of people who won't switch their engines off and will insist on revving them up outside the school for an hour on end. And I was interested in Stuart Johnson's idea of closing the school streets to traffic, although that won't be appropriate for every street. It would have to be on a case-by-case basis that's assessed. But it depends on what the evidence base suggests works. So if the evidence base suggests that this kind of more educative approach is producing significant effects and far more than any kind of punitive approach, then fine.
Did you want to come in on that, Julian?
Yes, absolutely. And we do work on evidence and what works. And the risk is that if you go straight to the Hackney approach in a much less dense area where there are more complex journeys and trips, you would just end up with, unfortunately, a big backlash, and it would just be counterproductive. So the evidence that we have drawn from and speaking to people like Sustrans and Living Streets is that it really is important to get that mix of incentives, good information, and what we call restructuring the environment. So those safety initiatives around the schools, making it more conspicuous, and in Blueprint 2, when we can get funding for more traffic calming, there's a lot of evidence to show that is successful, and it does get that increase in walking, cycling and wheeling. And also evidence shows that the enforcement side is likely to be more effective if you've got community buy-in. So I would argue that we are being robust, but we do want to bring people with us. And it's about winning hearts and minds. And I think that's really important. If you want people to change their habits, They've got to be persuaded that it's the easiest, most comfortable thing to do, and it's not a hard thing to do. So it's not gonna happen overnight. It's going to take time, but I think we can win that battle for hearts and minds. Thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Stuart's not here now, is he? When I met with them some years ago, I was saying exactly this is how I thought Colchester Cycling Campaign could get involved in what we were trying to do in Colchester, or what we should be doing in Colchester. If you want to drive modal shift, you've got to start with young people, and getting them on their bikes, or cycling or walking is the way to do it. Of course, in the old days, we all cycled or walked to school because we went to the school that was closest to where we lived. When that changed, I think that's when people started getting in cars and putting their children in cars, and it's quite frustrating. We're now in that situation. By school route audits, I'm assuming, Julian, you're talking to the schools, finding out where their children come from, and then working out the safest and best route for those children to get to the school, which is the most sensible thing to do. From my point of view, when we were looking at investing money in RTS and all sorts of other things we were looking at in Colchester 2 or 3 years ago, I was saying that you didn't want a segregated cycle lane all the way down Lexon Road, for instance, necessarily, but what you do want to do is look at every bit of, you want to find the safest route for children to be able to get from their home to the school, but those bits where they have to go onto main and difficult roads, that's where we need to invest the money in putting in the segregated cycle lanes, etc. Because parents aren't going to allow their children. I certainly wouldn't have allowed my daughter to cycle to school if I felt that she was going to be in danger. But if there was a nice easy route, which is what we actually found for her to get to school, that's the way I would allow her to do it. But otherwise, parents are always going to continue putting their children into the motor car and taking them to school. So I'm really keen on this. Reward wise, are you talking to shops and cycle manufacturers and what have you in how you're, because there's got to be a way of rewarding children for doing this, whether that means and parents, whether that means they get a cheaper bicycle or vouchers because they're doing so much, if they're cycling, it means they can then upgrade to a better bicycle because they're getting vouchers, whatever. There's got to be a way we can involve those people with this scheme to make it more attractive for people to use it. I think I've probably got loads more I'd like to say on it, because I think it's a really good idea. And I think the only way to get, as I say, to drive modal shift in this country is to start with young people and getting them to do it. So I think you're doing exactly the right thing. I am concerned that being more draconian around school streets and closures. I think we did do some consultation on that a few years ago, and that went down quite badly. So probably the approach that you're suggesting at the moment is the right one. But I'm really keen. Thank you.
Julian, if you want to come back on some points there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's essential that we're pragmatic and we find what works. In terms of those incentives, yes, we are absolutely looking at those incentives. At the moment, it's much easier to get vouchers, but what we would like to evolve is to look at how we could get incentives to use local businesses, to encourage footfall to local businesses. So that's something that we're actively looking at the moment. But yeah, it's about that, getting that mixed and providing the right incentive, not just for the children and the pupils, but also for their parents, because actually we're trying to change the habits of both. And as you'll see in the school holidays, people always notice the big drop in volumes. And there are all sorts of opportunities now with parents home working, and we understand, we saw some analysis last week where most of the home working is now on a Monday and Friday. We're looking at sort of campaigns we can run on Mondays and Fridays to encourage the parents to be active in the way they travel to school with the children, so that they get some active travel and get some active minutes as well. But yeah, absolutely right. Being pragmatic and identifying the right incentives will drive what makes this work. Thank you.
Just an idea on an incentive, Julian. We did a scheme called Beat the Street, which was a fun thing that families did where they had to tag a card against certain things and they got points and a leaders table. I'm wondering if maybe a scheme with some schools that every time they walk in, they get a token or so forth, and whoever gets the most tokens, I don't know, gets a prize or gets on a leaderboard. But that's just an idea I'm mooting. Councillor Rippingale and then Councillor Barber.
So I'm very much for the school streets, because the ward that I represent is actually very highly dense housing in terms of its Victorian area. The schools are very much based in the community. I was really interested by the Parker's Stride. However, I think there's only one school that in my ward that possibly could do that using a Colchester city car park. I suppose for me, we say about being more, using more enforcement, and I feel in some areas like Hackney and in my case Newtown, that possibly is the only way to enforce change, because these are parents generally who will be living quite close to the school and still driving. I feel like it's going to be a lot of behaviour change that's going to be necessary in those more densely populated areas. And I'd be really interested to see how you are varying the scheme across the different demographics and the different densities of housing in Colchester.
So in terms of those density issues, we've received some funding to cover a small number of schools in Colchester. So at the moment we're in that learning phase, and we're sort of that test, learn and iterate approach where we're learning about, you know, different types of schools and different types of trips. But going forward, we hope to be able to secure more funding to do more schools. But onto that point you made about enforcement, I think what's really important, and that's why we've got this sort of iterative blueprint approach, is that we monitor and we understand what works, and we get feedback from the schools and the local community and bring them on the journey with us. So if we get to the point where we tried all those things, we tried to make it more conspicuous, we've had the incentives, if those things are not working enough, and they will work to some degree, if there is still a big problem around the schools and we've exhausted all those other options, then that's when we would hope that then the school and the school community and the parents would be suggesting to us that actually perhaps there is we should, you know, consider the enforcement approach before we undertake that. So yeah, it's not a starting point, and we want to trial those other physical and behavioural interventions first. But absolutely, if there's an appetite to do it, yeah, we would be great to trial an enforcement approach if that's what the community want.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. I don't believe it would be appropriate for me to comment on the content of the report this evening because of the interest I declared earlier, but just to say thanks to Julian for coming along this evening, and also Emily as well for the work you're both doing on this. One point I would encourage members here, and if any other members are listening in, which I know a couple are, I would encourage you to discuss with either through your county council or directly with Nick Hill from the sustainability team at Essex County Council to help develop school travel plans as well, because it's a really important part of the work that's being done around this, and there is still a number of schools that don't have them in place or are out of date. So I'd encourage you to get involved in that too, because that involves Parking Partnership, Essex County Council, Colchester Council. So all partners really need to work together. And one of the big challenges I find in Colchester is that a lot of, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere across the country as well, is that a lot of the schools were built in areas where it was assumed that you wouldn't have level of car ownership that we do have today. And particularly in rural areas, there's CBH estates that are built around the school sensibly, but now as catchment areas have gone, as the schools have expanded or rationalised, for want of a better way of putting it, but between villages, you have a lot of people travelling into a small area, and that brings itself a huge challenge, which we do need, which is being looked at, and I think is why travel plan everybody trying to bring the community with them is a really important aspect of this, because otherwise it will just backfire and we won't get any further on the issue. As we've seen in projects before, if it's dealt with wrong, the community facing aspect, the whole project just gets dropped. You don't even get halfway measures. So I do believe that these incremental steps are an important first step of that. I'm a big fan of school streets and I support them strongly, but bringing the community with us is a vital aspect of that. But I'll let others comment on the report. Thanks.
Thank you. So we had a suggestion from Stuart Johnson about essentially recommending a tougher line from Essex County Council. Be interested to see what people think of that. I think it's harder around rural schools because, as you say, for example, in Rowhedge, a lot of the children come from Fingringhoe to Rowhedge Primary School. So it's a real issue there. But examples like Newtown, even like Shrub End, tend to be the maximum someone has to walk is usually a mile. And it's usually, when I see the heat map, it's usually one child that is that far away. And that's a walkable distance, if we're being honest. Even in bad weather, an umbrella will get you there, get you to school and then get you to work if you're walking a child. I feel like Councillor Gocher is a little bit woolly. It is a bit of kind of like, what do you fancy? And sometimes you do have to get tough. And Hackney did get a lot of backlash. There wasn't unanimous support for it. They did get a lot of backlash from some locals, some people that use the road as a cut through, and some parents that basically wanted to park on the zigzags, drop their kid off and drive away. And councillors were getting death threats over that stuff. So when you have to make these tough decisions, as we know, for example, with Crouch Street, there is backlash. There always will be in democracy. And it is about, as you say, there is the aspects of bringing communities together. But for me, with schools, you do have the aspect that you do have teachers and also usually PTAs that you can try and bring with you to do that. And my feeling is that we should be looking at areas that are urban that could be trialled to do the Hackney model, where you do shut the street for 15 minutes, half an hour between the opening and closing. Residents know when that is. They know how to alternate their day. It's not on a bus route, so you're not affecting any buses. I think there's an opportunity to do that, is my personal opinion. What I would like to know, Julian, is have we approached the schools, or have schools had to approach Essex County Council? And are there a lot of schools in Colchester that haven't really shown that much engagement and interest if we have contacted them?
So generally, we're approaching the schools because we've got a limited amount of funding. So we've selected schools in certain areas, but we're beginning to sort of reach out to a wider network of schools, and we are finding it quite challenging actually, because the schools are very busy. They've got very busy agendas, and it's quite hard to get their interest. If there were a school that wanted to trial something, we would love to work with the school. If there is that willingness from the school and the parents, absolutely. But yeah, engaging on this issue is quite difficult, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of investment in that engagement and understanding and surveys and understanding the local problems and what the solutions could be. But absolutely, yeah, we would love to work with local members to be introduced to schools and really to kind of take those conversations forward. Thank you.
I'm wondering on that if it's worth liaising more with county councillor members as well, especially if you're having trouble with schools, but also they should have a knowledge of the difficulties you will face with some of those schools and be able to tell you right away, no, you shouldn't do that there, or actually these options would be available in this area. I'm wondering if that is something moving forward. I am slightly worried about the funding as well, because it sounds like we can only do limited amount of schools as well. So if every school in Colchester said, right, we're all on board, we want to do this, we've got our own version, would there be a problem with funding if every school wanted to do some sort of scheme?
Funding is a challenge, which is why we've developed that tiered approach, just to be pragmatic. So if schools really have a high appetite for do something, I think that we can find the resources, and based on the fact that it's quite challenging to get them to engage at that level, but also recognise that some schools just want to do it, as Councillor Barber mentioned, they just need to do a travel plan, and we can give them a toolkit to start to raise awareness of the issue. So whilst funding is a challenge, I think in most schools in Colchester, they would fit into one of those three tiers, and we would be able to do something.
Great, thank you for that. I've got Councillor Ellis.
I think they should all have to do a travel plan. I think as soon as you join a start with the school, you should be making sure that as few people are having to drive in as possible. So I think that's vital. I was just going to say, Chairman, that I'm not keen on the stick approach before the carrot's been tried, if I'm honest. And I think it would be a good idea to try the carrot approach, which is what they seem to be doing here. But what I wouldn't want is this thrown into the long grass and us not look at it again. So I think you probably need to schedule another meeting or this to come back, even if it's in 12 months' time, for an update as to see how it's progressing and what's been done. Otherwise, I can see that's the opportunity, I think, to say actually it's not working, and yes, we need to take a tougher approach. But I don't think you need to go for that from the get-go, in my opinion. Others may differ.
How do others feel on that approach? So we could recall it back in 6 months or a year. Okay, that seems pretty unanimous. So if it's not firm enough, we can go for Stuart Johnson's suggestion that we write and say we'd like it firmer. Any other questions for Julian? He's been really helpful. Councillor Gocher.
Just on the subject of people who kind of travel quite some way to school, I think it was mentioned fingering to Rowhage or something. I mean, it seems to me that a lot of this is down to the fact that there aren't the old school buses that used to exist when I was a lad, because I lived in a village and we were on the school bus. I mean, what have the county council got the ability to subsidise school buses? I mean, I know there's going to be a financial response, which is fair enough, but I'm just throwing the question out there. What possibilities are there in that direction?
Over to you, Julian.
Yeah, that there are school buses. There is school transport if children live a certain distance. It's not actually my area. That's dealt with by our passenger transport unit. I think it's over 3 miles, and we can check that and come back to you. But there is that available. To go just to look at the point about coming back to the panel, I think that's a really good idea to come back in a year, because we've got a number of initiatives underway, and we've got a rigorous monitoring and evaluation. And I think if we then come back and present the findings, and then panel members feel that, you know, then more needs to be done, and we've had that further engagement with the school, and we've identified other schools to trial the enforcement mechanism, then that would be a really good time to consider that. But as the other member mentioned, I think let's trial this, the carrots and the changes around the traffic calming that we're trying to introduce around some of the schools. Let's see how that works, and then see what the evidence tells us will be the next step.
Great. A suggestion I've had is that as chairman of the panel, if people are happy for me to write, if I write to the cabinet member for highways to ask that we get Essex County Council to get an up-to-date school travel plan from every school in Colchester, if people are happy with that. So I'll write to him on behalf of the committee to say that we'd like Essex to pursue to get an up-to-date travel plan from all the schools in Colchester, if people are happy. Cool. Okay, if you put that as an action for me, Matt, but I hope I'll remember and do that tomorrow. Any other questions for Julian? That looks like a no. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Julian, on that. That was really helpful. So now it's over to Emily.
So I've just put together a short presentation to go through the report visually. Okay. Yeah, next slide. So not to dwell too long on this, but I thought just to recap on the Public Health England stats in terms of the number of deaths pollution contributes to each year in the UK and the huge cost to the NHS. Obviously, everyone knows we've got 3 air quality management areas in Colchester, with public health reporting 1 in 20 deaths in Colchester linked to poor air quality. And of course, children are amongst the most vulnerable to the health impacts of air pollution because they've still got developing lungs and it can impact on their cognitive development. Next slide, please. So again, just a little bit of background on the Careless Pollution campaign. So we started in 2019 with a first successful bid to DEFRA, and our key objectives for that project was to raise awareness of air pollution and then encourage the community to switch off their engines when they're waiting. And we very much took an asset-based community development approach and started the project with 3 months of intensive community engagement. And we spoke to over 3,000 residents, schools and businesses to sort of find out from them what they knew about air pollution, how concerned they were, and what sort of initiatives we could take to help encourage them and support them to switch off their engines. So that's where the Careless Pollution branding and campaign came out of, co-designed with a stakeholder group, an advisory group. And the reason for the name, the Careless Pollution, is really that leaving an engine on is quite, for a lot of people, an inadvertent habit. It's something that they haven't thought about and they don't understand the health consequences and the unnecessary pollution that's caused by engine idling. So in 2021, we got another grant that helped to further embed the campaign, including work with schools. And then we've just received another DEFRA grant, and this has got some specific focused work with schools to continue the campaign. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we're actually doing with schools, so we've developed a schools toolkit, and there are activities for the different key stages in a school. So they're appropriately designed activities for the age group. And what we've tried to do is to link it in with the curriculum. So there's activities that link with English, with maths, with science, with geography. The idea is that the schools can carry out this as part of their general activity rather than a difficult add-on when we know schools are really challenged with time. So we've got the school toolkit, it's got lesson plans in it, it's got activities. We've designed a presentation that can be presented in assemblies, and that can be done by the school, by a volunteer, or by one of our team when we go in to work with schools. And we've also carried out a number of workshops. We've got a number of handheld wearable pollution monitors that we're able to lend out to schools so they can do their own studies. And we'd have had a number of promotional events. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd just focus on a couple of case studies of work we've done with schools. So an example is St James's, obviously at the bottom of East Hill in the air quality management area. It was one of the key schools we wanted to work with. So most of our activity was in the first year of the campaign in 2021, where the children made individual pledges of what they could do to reduce their impact on air pollution, but they also wrote letters to their family asking their family to switch off their engines whenever they're waiting. We used the toolkit and the different activities to work with the children, and then we did a big promotion on Clean Air Day. In 2021, we had a roaming Zorb ball, which was to sort of represent how toxic air pollution builds up inside a car. And we used this at St James's and a number of other schools and events to sort of highlight the issue of air pollution. And this in St James's, we got national coverage. We had East Anglian come and film the children, and coverage nationally and locally. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I should have said actually about St James's. We have recently, in fact today, met them again to sort of catch up with them on how things are going and to sort of talk to them about the next steps and how we can sort of embed it as a regular part of the curriculum rather than the one-offs that happened before. So we've left them with a load of our signs to put outside the school, and we've discussed with them how we perhaps work more through the children, doing more activities more regularly with the children. So there's that drip, drip, nudge, nudge effect that's feeding back to parents to encourage them to switch off their engines. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we worked with St Thomas More's last year in 2022. Again, we did assemblies and we did activities around the toolkit, and we lent them our air pollution monitors, and they did a 3-month study of air pollution with the children. And they also participated with us in Clean Air Day. They did a sort of protest in Brook Street where they all went with the Choky the emoji masks and asked drivers to switch off their engine on the street, and was responded to very positively. I've included here the film because they are involved in the film and feature in it. And I'm not sure if everyone has seen the film because I think we tried to play it before and it didn't work. So we'll attempt to play it again.
And I think most people are horrified actually to learn about the potential impact on our health. So earlier this week, I spoke to a number of my colleagues delivering a presentation about air pollution, and I recruited all with experts so they can feel empowered to their patients about their health.
The careless pollution sign outside our house is also expecting to aware of how badly air pollution can be in Colchester. When we moved here 15 years ago, there's quite a quiet road, and over the last 15 years, the traffic's increased so much that it was something like incentive and unknown to pass on health. To the point where it ended up having a full-blown asthma attack triggered by air pollution.
Recent campaign because we want to have cleaning ourselves around campus. We have lots of students coming in, whether that's walking, cycling, by cars, and if we are proposing to take personal action, in place masks to place what they reduce air pollution for them. Our support in this campaign is very important, not only for the environment but for everybody else. It's just so it's not.
So we made that film to help make it clear to different groups how they could use the different resources, and obviously to help schools understand the different opportunities they've got to use the resources. Hopefully we'll go back to the presentation now. Next slide, please. So those were 2 schools that are linked with the air quality management area. We've also been working with St John's on the Green and Unity School in Greenstead, Cherry Tree. So altogether, we've engaged to date with about 28 schools, and this is in different ways depending on what the school wanted. So sometimes it's been assemblies, sometimes it's been talking to the children about the toolkits, or it's been giving them banners, signs and materials to give to the children to take home. Next slide, please. So in terms of valuation, we haven't evaluated phase 2 yet. That's due April, May this year. But we did do an evaluation in 2021 at the end of phase 1. And these stats are specifically around schools and the feedback from schools. So we had a number of conversations with carers and parents outside alongside a number of different schools, and 63% had become aware of the careless pollution campaign. And encouragingly, 65% has said that they were switching their engine off more than they had been doing previously. But we did have a hardcore of 21% who said that they never switch off their engine. And obviously they are our sort of target audience for ongoing work. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, we've got another successful DEFRA bid, as I mentioned. So what we want to do with that is reach out to more schools so that we get the campaign exposure in more schools and really build on the current momentum. We want to, in the longer term, secure a legacy. And we're sort of doing this through this peer-to-peer support between schools and the peer-to-peer within schools, the children hopefully influencing their parents and their family members. And then this way it'll be much more sustainable, because once the funding's finished and we have to step away, we need it to be sustained and to continue with just limited support from us. We want to further develop the schools toolkit with input from the schools and the children. And we also want to look at how we integrate walking and cycling into the toolkit. So it's not just about idling. It includes more sustainable modes of travel to school as well. And to do that, Julia mentioned it, but we want to work much more closely with Essex County Council, with North Essex Parking Partnership and other partners who are doing work with schools. So it's a bit more of a coordinated approach, because it all links together. It's all about it's all about the environment. It's all about active travel and health. So I think schools would appreciate and benefit from a bit more of a coordinated approach. Next slide, please. And just the final slide was on the points that you made earlier, Chair, on how we'd appreciate your help and support to continue with this educational approach. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Emily on this? Councillor Gocher first.
It's just a comment, and mainly, I mean, I think that's absolutely fantastic, and there's some very encouraging stats there, and you know, it's only 21% that are vociferously not doing it, and there's been some real good engagement there. And what I particularly liked, obviously, I know St James's, I know St Thomas More. They're not far off on Brook Street and East Street, which are heavily polluted. And what I found particularly good there was the images of the children, and kids like doing stuff, and they remember more when they've been actively doing stuff than just sitting in an assembly. And there's some fantastic stuff there where they were using those monitors and stuff like that. So I was going to ask, are there any plans for any more kind of, you know, actions like that, where they go to a polluted area and do stuff with monitors, or scrape pollution off the walls and test it, or any kind of active stuff? Because I think that was absolutely fantastic, really interesting.
So the air pollution monitors are available for any school to borrow. What we'd like to do is the schools that have borrowed them to sort of go and talk to the other schools about what they've done with them, and then a school could develop their own sort of methodology and their own study that would suit their own area. So that's sort of an ambition of this next stage of the project. But certainly in terms of activities, there are some sort of science-based activities in there. But again, we'd welcome that feedback from the schools that we're working with to further improve the toolkit and make sure that it's as interactive and as sort of inspiring for the children as possible.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation on that. I think it's a real good success story that we should continue shouting about. The numbers are pretty significant, really, to have such a behavioural change, and behavioural changes are the toughest part about a lot of this. We can, as we discussed earlier, we can enforce, but where we have schemes like this and we're achieving just through education, it's really quite significant. And I agree, it's very heartening to see only 21% of people so far steadfastly against doing any measures on this. And I think I may have made this point last time, because I subbed relatively recently on this panel, but the statistic about the amount of deaths that are related to air pollution is quite startling. And it surprised me it was as low, so high impacts as it is. And I do think that's a message we should continue to drum into any of our comms on this, because it really is very startling how bad the pollution is, even in there like Colchester. I think a lot of time we think this is in a big inner city areas like London, but it's having a detrimental impact on children across the borough right now, and that's quite a startling statistic. So I think if we put the comms out saying how well we're doing on this, and then also re-emphasize the message about how bad this is on people's lives, tangible outcome. I think that hopefully will help us keep driving success. But just credit to your team and everything you're doing on this. Really good to see the success so far. Thank you.
Any other questions? So just about how we can help. For example, we've got full council on Thursday. What Essex County Council sometimes do is that they get councillors to sign a pledge on a certain issue. That may be an option for a full council, and try and chat to some councillors you don't always see to explain the work we're doing would be really good. Maybe some comms to go out and an email to councillors to say, can you share this on social media would be really good as well. And maybe if you're doing any events in any of the wards, is maybe contact the councillors and say, oh, we'll be here at this time. Would you be, if you're interested in come along, this is where we'll be. I think that would be good ways to get councillors involved. Or if you're working for a particular school, contact the local councillors to say, we're doing this, any ideas, anything you want to add, so forth, would hopefully get more engagement. But I don't know if there's any other ideas from other councillors. I think we're all on board, but certainly. Okay, any other comments or questions? Cool, I think we're all happy. Brilliant, okay. So our recommendation, we're going back, gone all the way to the top, was to, whether we wish to support Essex County Council in their current Safer Schools scheme. And from what I could gather, we do, and we'll see them hopefully in a year's time to see the progress on that. And sorry, just skipping pages. This is the fun of having it all online. There we go. Oh no, skip to one. And support the carless campaign, pollution campaign, which we all seem pretty unanimous on as well. Okay, brilliant. And we've all put our comments in there as well. Fantastic. Okay, and thank you again, Julian, for coming and giving up your evening. Much appreciated from us. And we hope to see the results soon.
Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us to the work programme. So I think I'm passing that over to you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is the last meeting of the municipal year. The work programme item, well, the official work programme is finished now. The only thing the panel might like to consider is whether it wants to make suggestions. I mean, you made a few this evening already about items that might be considered in future, or whether you're happy to consider the draft work programme at the first meeting of this panel next year. Thank you.
So I would suggest we wait till next year, which will be May or June, whenever the first meeting is, because we may have a different chair and completely different panel. Depends if we all ask to move panels and so forth, or your group decides they want you on a different panel. So I think only one of us is up for re-election, so most of us should be. Oh, two of us. Oh, three of you. three of you up for election. So we never know what happens. So I think if we wait till June, as I say, we've got some ideas in the bag already. And if I'm not in this panel, I'm happy to come along and recommend them to the future panel. So and we've got that option if we're not on this panel as well. So everyone okay with that? Cool. Okay, so that takes me to unfortunately excluding the public. So for anyone who is a member of the public will have to leave the meeting. So I move in accordance with section 100A.4 of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the public, including the press, from the meeting, so that any items containing exempt information, for example, confidential personal, financial or legal advice, in Part B of this agenda can be considered. Exempt information is defined in section 100.1 and schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.